With a great unbundling, can traditional firms compete with AI native challenges? And we have all the leading minds on this topic here today. It's such an honor, such an amazing panel. And so please take your seats. And moderating the panel will no one else than Pablo Arredondo, our CodeX fellow. And he's doesn't need any introduction, really. Yeah, Pablo is like a real innovator in the legal space, and he has kindly agreed to moderate this session here today. So, Pablo, take it away.
All right. So great to be back. Thank you so much. Okay. So wonderful to see so many friend faces and to be at it. So we'll jump in. So at the last panel, I think Shlomo referenced Iron Man's Jarvis as this sort of ideal AI system, and you really need to give equal time and things like this. So we're going to give a little Detective Comics to intro us. In Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight trilogy, the third one, he has to fight this arch-villain named Bane. And there's a particular scene where Batman's fighting Bane, and the thing with Bane, you have to realize, is he was born and raised in an underground prison in, I think, Central America. That spent his whole life in there. So anyway, the fight's not going that well, and he uses one of his special gadgets, and he turns off all the lights. And then Bane says to him, "Oh, you think darkness is your ally, but you merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it." John, are AI native startups like yours the bane of the legal profession?
That was
yes, that's you. No, Omar will be able to weigh in.
Okay. The bane of the legal profession. So I would say, well, it depends on how you define legal profession.
Right.
So the bane of in-house teams, not at all. The bane of individual lawyers, not at all. The bane of traditional law firms, maybe.
But let me just spend a little bit. But is there something about being AI native as opposed to have merely adopting AI that means that you'll have the edge?
Well, yeah, the distinction between AI native and adopting AI is probably, so essentially like a co-pilot. So a co-pilot tool where you use it in your day-to-day, that's adopting AI. But then it's hard to really trust that the AI is doing what you think it's doing. It's hard to ever really not have to look over it as much. Whereas AI native, if you start with the AI doing the work, and then you figure out sort of the rough edges of what it can do, and importantly, what it can't do, then you can try to push out the boundaries of what it can do, and then you can have reliance on it to know, okay, I already figured out the boundaries of what it can and can't do. So then you can kind of offload a little mental cognitive work that otherwise would have been kind of rechecking over the work. So that's the main distinction about the way I think about this two things.
Omar, what about you? What are the advantages of being born in AI as opposed to merely adopting?
Yeah, I think maybe stepping back from even law firms, people use different definitions of AI native. To me, a very simple one is were you founded in the last 3 years or before 3 years ago? And I think literally just based off of that one distinction, anybody who's building software in a world post foundation models being ubiquitous and readily available and accessible has the luxury of not having to update a lot of legacy software or legacy people, and you can really start fresh. And I think that's a huge advantage from a speed perspective. I think the reality is I don't see traditional law firms, or at least the people at traditional law firms, going anywhere. I think they add a lot of value and they're really valuable in the ecosystem. I think the challenge is right now the business model and the fundamental sort of setup of the traditional law firm is not meeting the needs of many clients. And so AI native law firms, I think, have two advantages. One is that by virtue of being new, we have the luxury of building everything the right way from the ground up. The other advantage is we're able to prove, and I would say build kind of that 0 to 1 model that the customer, which is the joint customer of the AI native and the traditional law firm, really needs and demands, which is actually not paying hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars an hour for work that can now be automated, not being forced to bundle cognitive services, and essentially taking those amazing humans and actually deploying them in a much better way, where when you combine that with AI, it's a better value proposition.
All right. Pablo, maybe before we move to the next question, I would just add to that. I think exactly to Omar's point, right? I think there's something so hard about unlearning. And learning, if you're starting from a blank canvas, right, and you're learning, it's a lot easier to then build up and ramp up. And I think, I was listening to a podcast with the founder of Replit, and he was talking about how coding is changing, right? And so this is an audience that's much more familiar with coding probably than I am in terms of being hands-on. But in terms of what's happening now with the coding revolution and how easy it is, time to production and how fast, what the assistive tools are, it is a different workflow. It's a different way of doing it, right? And so the point was, it is new, and those who are taking to it for the first time may have that advantage. And so when we talk about nativity, there is that sort of leveling up that you're getting as a new startup in the space, as a new entrant and a new participant. And I think the question for us law firms is, how do we reach that nativity, and how do we unlearn while learning, and how do we build that all into our ecosystem? So it's a fun exercise for sure.
All right. So Ilona and Scott, between your two firms, I believe you have about 350 years of history. When the typewriter came out, somebody had referenced it, Cravath was half a century old. Now, you two obviously sit at a very special place in a firm. You're innovative. But I'm gonna ask you to think about, if you were to survey the partners of your firm and ask them to rate these AI native law firms on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being adorable and 10 being formidable. What do you think the average score would be, and do you think they have it right or wrong?
First of all, I have to say that I'm appearing on this panel under protest. There were some emails going around. We were doing the planning, and I said, okay, well, let's get together. We'll talk about the questions. We'll brainstorm. And Pablo said, no.
You don't get the questions beforehand. Come on.
I'm talking about the questions. We're not doing any planning. We are showing up. Clearly, you've done some preparation yourself, Pablo.
Yes.
But I have not. But anyway, so nothing can be held against me.
The question was about ranking from adorable to formidable, Scott.
No. So I would say it's. I've never asked that question of the partners in my firm. My sense is that it's probably close to 1. It might be lower than 1. And I don't mean that in sort of an arrogant way. I hope that does sound arrogant, but I don't mean that to sound an arrogant way. I just don't think there's really a great sort of awareness of the AI native law firm among sort of most traditional, sort of incumbent law firms. So I guess maybe that's to your advantage, right? Like you have the stealth advantage that there's not a great awareness. So therefore, I don't think that there's a great perception of threat at this point. That's my sense.
I would agree with that. And I think it's a question of the context enrichment. So where the partners aren't really aware of what it is or how it is, right? They don't spend their every day thinking about this. They do their work. And that's why teams like ours are so important. But when you set the context and you explain what this is and what the actual competitive advantage is, then it starts to get scary. And I've seen this firsthand, and I've seen the impact of, just kind of understanding the figures of the success that companies like yours are seeing. And right away, the partners start to understand where things could go, right? So the direction of travel starts to become clear. So I actually think this is a really healthy push in the industry, because I agree. I think there is room for both, and there are strengths that will come into view, more definitively. But I think having this kind of nudge for the more traditional firms is so critical right now, because there is so much that needs to change, and this is just a phenomenal impetus to do that.
Is it fair to say, though, neither of your firms are having somebody say, I'm going to go with an AI native law firm, thanks, yet?
Hasn't happened yet, to my knowledge.
I think yet is operative.
All right.
Yeah.
So in January, Fred Wilson, the famous venture capitalist of Union Square Ventures, had a blog post where he said, I was doing an investment, and I was about to pay $50,000 to one of these AmLaw firms. And I said, nah, I'm not going to do it. And so he turned not to an AI native law firm, not even to an AI legal tech tool, but to Google Notebook, the podcasting one, right? And there are people in here who've given they're pouring their soul into being like the tech that he would use to go do the due diligence on it. And he used Google Notebook, and he basically said it went great, and maybe I had one little follow-up call. Is the which type of external firm, be it AI native versus not AI native, is that really not the question relative to just using AI in its sort of raw form coming out of these frontier models, and a light touch of in-house counsel maybe for the edges? And we'll go all four of you guys on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to start. I think there's it's exciting. Probably this conference this year compared to a year ago, and 12 months from now it'll be even more the case. I would say there's now an entire market mapping of AI native law firms. So first of all, there's just like traditional law firms. I think we're now seeing a lot of every day. I think Y Combinator has like 10 more that are coming out. So it's exciting to see the rate at which people are spinning up these AI native law firms. Speaking from UDS perspective, we're not. We have an AI native law firm. However, our core DNA and our first 18 months as a company was building a technology company, and we still have the core technology company. I say that because I think when you think about where each AI native law firm decides to focus, the answer is a little bit different. And in my view, one challenge with this market is in reality, all people, especially in-house counsel, have a very high bar of trust that they demand from their outside counsel. And when it comes to any kind of significant legal work, I think it's very unlikely that they're going to trust a 19-year-old out of Y Combinator to take some very sensitive matter and use AI to handle it appropriately. So in our case, given our audience and our focus mainly on the Fortune 1000, we've not really seen our AI native law firm as a replacement or a competitor to traditional law firms. It's more been for that category of work that maybe it doesn't make sense to have 30 associates in the data room summarizing contracts in a M&A due diligence deal. Then the AI native law firm can actually just help provide an obvious way to not wait for the law firm to get on board with that, but unbundle that work, have some of it go to not just our tech, but actually an M&A lawyer who maybe even come from one of those firms in the past who can actually do the human in the loop kind of final work and checking. But I think in my world, we haven't really seen the opportunity as, first of all, going after the Fred Wilson, very low value type of work. I think most of that, personally, I believe is asymptotically approaching zero anyway. So you might be able to get some kind of a temporary revenue stream from that. But in the long run, I don't see it as a very sustainable model.
And with these sorts of questions, I analogize quite a bit to healthcare, right, and to medicine. So if you think about how things have evolved and how we look for service in healthcare now, we've had WebMD for a while, right? So we've had it probably since the 90s. I don't know exactly when, but having WebMD and having information online didn't mean that we stopped going to doctors. And having urgent care clinics on the corner didn't mean that we stopped going to hospitals. And having more specialties in medicine didn't mean that we stopped going to our general wellness doctor, right? So I think the pie is expanding. And in terms of how that pie is broken down and the different levels of service provided by that pie, that's really the question. I think in this increasingly sophisticated world that we live in, the advent of AI is essentially allowing for greater levels of complexity across the board. And to me, that means that there will be more layers that are needed from a service perspective and more sophistication demanded at each of those layers because of the competitive push across the industry. And that to me is really exciting. And at each of those layers, right, you will have to perform with AI-enabled services and with AI embedded into it. Because even now, I'm sure many of us are seeing this too. I'm seeing examples of friends and family who are seeing doctors, getting advice, and then they are actually enriching their own understanding of whatever is happening through AI and through certain data connectors and putting things together and then bringing that forward to their physicians and catching gaps. And I think what we'll start seeing is that if legal doesn't rise to the occasion of embedding AI in the way that is at the most sophisticated level of service, then our clients will start seeing gaps. And we can't afford that, right? So we have to think about where can we deliver at our best all the time, understanding that there is more room for greater types of delivery. And, really it's a question of how much can we process all at once.
John.
So, yeah, I mean, traditional law firms, because they're selling hours of human labor traditionally. So it's harder for them to deal with the problem of sort of cannibalizing that, right? So I think that's obviously an advantage of like a hybrid thing where you're selling tech and you're selling legal services, because then you can say, well, what's best for the client? Is it best for the client to, over time, turn something from outside counsel to in-house tool? If so, let's do that for the client, right? So that's a unique kind of setup of a more of an AI native firm and a tech company. But I mean, I think we'll see in two directions. So some things will actually move from not being sent to outside counsel to potentially, if it's an AI native outside counsel, being sent to outside counsel. And then we'll see, as you mentioned, the other direction. So in the first direction, what's interesting there is if there's a lot of stuff, I'm also the CEO of a company, not just helping with the AI native law firm. As a CEO of a company, I'll be like, oh, I'm not going to send stuff to outside counsel in certain situations because it's going to take too long and it's going to be too expensive if it's a traditional law firm. But if things are going to be a lot faster and a lot cheaper, I'm much more likely to send it to outside counsel because they have the ability to see across more things, to tell you what's market more so, because they're doing this with a lot of other clients. And there's the trust layer, there's the liability layer of the fact that they are providing legal advice. And so that's helpful and that's good. So you could actually see some things go there more. I mean, so one example, and this isn't what I would do as a CEO of my company, but if I was, at a hedge fund, for example, and I might want to know, okay, can I trade on this information? Can I get legal advice about whether or not this is tradable information? And if I didn't send it to outside counsel, I would be in a gray zone not knowing that. But if I send it to a traditional outside counsel, it might take 2 weeks to get that information back. If that happened, then I might have just totally lost the opportunity to make the trade. So I might send it to outside counsel if it's an AI native outside counsel that has a lot of my context already onboarded in there. And then they could still have someone look at the output and give me something in maybe 45 minutes. And that might be worth $100 million to me because I can make a trade that would make a shit ton of money, right? So I might pay, I don't know, $200,000 for 45 minutes of work as an example. So that's something where I wouldn't have sent it there before. It's because now it can be fully built on speed that I would maybe do it. So that's why you might go in that direction.
I think there's an important point there around like frictionless interoperability, right? And understanding how that value chain and workflow works together and whether that can be built in the first place. But I think that's a great point.
I mean, I think there's an assumption there, though, right, that sending it to traditional law firm is going to take a lot longer. And I understand why that assumption is being made because, typically like traditional law firm is, working on things at a slower rate. But I don't know that assumption holds, right? Like there are, the tools are just frankly getting, tremendously better. Like inside a traditional law firm, we recognize that, the expectations for how long something takes to do and how much it costs, those are changing dramatically. And so, the change is happening inside of law firms as well. I mean, I realize that looking at sort of the sweep of history and innovation, right, there's some important examples of, examples where incumbents were largely displaced by newcomers, right? The classic sort of, PC computer displacing the mainframe, right? New technology innovation, right, comes in, initially starts off doing sort of smaller tasks, eventually, becomes more and more sophisticated, has economics on its side, and can sort of slowly replace that incumbent technology in those incumbent companies. I'm not sure that dynamic is really at play here, and it's sort of for the reason that your example illustrated, Pablo, right? The argument that the thing that traditional law firms are, one thing that they're traditionally really bad at is raising capital and investing it. They are not capital intensive businesses, right? Like they are year to year, how much money we can make for service businesses. And so if we were entering a world where capital were likely to become much more important, I could see the argument that you would need different sorts of, ways of structuring legal services and ways of financing them. We're not seeing that. Technology, if anything, is becoming cheaper, right? We are now reaching a point where you can, we've got a particular data or legal problem. We can, vibe code a solution in an afternoon, right? I realize there's a lot of complexity there. It's not as easy as I make it sound. But nevertheless, the underlying technology is getting much cheaper. And so query whether we really are entering a world where you need a lot of capital in order to compete in legal services. The opposite may be true. And if that's the case, I think that incumbent firms have a lot of advantages that will continue to be important.
So it's kind of me. I mean, we've been working with language models going, way back, and recently it's public that one of the projects, I think, was it 16,000 hours of attorney time that we estimated was saved. Maybe not even just Cravath, but sort of generally, are you guys hearing anything from CFOs or from other, the folks who are bean counters about, hey, by the way, just so you know, we're really at risk of losing a key part of a revenue stream, or has that really not come up?
Do you, like from inside the law firm, do you mean?
Well, I know with Cravath, you're not going to talk about with Cravath. I mean, first rule of Cravath that you don't talk about Cravath. So how about from other people's law firms when you guys are out at cocktails, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, is anybody actually sort of looking at this now and saying, hey, there is this ledger of how we make our money and due diligence?
I have a friend who works at a law firm.
There we go. There we go.
This friend has told me. No, look, I mean, law firms are certainly worried about like what this means for economics. I don't think that's any secret. I don't think I'm revealing anything sensitive about that, right? Like this is a disruptive technology, right? Our clients are saying, we want you using AI. We expect you'll be able to do it more efficiently, and we expect that's going to mean lower bills for us, right? And that's a reasonable expectation from clients, and we're saying, yeah, we got to meet them there. We're making sort of the time and other investments to make sure we're prepared to meet that. But I think I would be lying if I'm saying like people aren't worried about what the future holds. Certainly are. I think probably all of us, no matter what field we're in, right? If you're teaching at Stanford Law School, if you're a computer engineer, if you're starting up a software company, right? Like all of these things, there's a lot of risk there and a lot of uncertainty. We don't really know what the new world's going to bring. So yes, there's definitely concern there.
Yeah, I think certainly there's interest in understanding potential revenue streams at risk, right? And understanding what they are and how they can be curtailed. But the way that I talk about it with my leadership team and just more broadly is that I think that's part of the analysis. I think that's certainly not the whole of the analysis. And to me, this is what's really exciting about right now, right? Of course, there's so much uncertainty. Of course, there's so much that we don't know. But that's also the opportunity to create. And the famous quote, right, the best way to predict the future is to create it. It's certainly true. And having that opportunity to think about what kind of operating model and business model can we have so that we can predict, right, so that we can scenario model these revenue streams rather than worrying about the risk of loss, that's where my focus is.
So one of the things that's amazed me about this sort of new world of legal tech and comparing it, I've been coming to these FutureLaws for a while. The startups never used to sponsor the whole conference, by the way. So that's kind of wonderful. And then the other thing we've seen, and John, certainly Norm AI, we've seen this quite recently, is bringing in absolutely world-class folks from law firms. Sometimes they're kind of leaving anyway, and they just want to go do this next. Sometimes they just say, yep, enough of this, I want to go do it. Talk to us, and then I'm going to get to cloning these experts, and digitally cloning, I should say. Talk to us about, I have two parts of it. One is, why is it so important in a world where the AI is so good that you still have somebody who knows all of this stuff? And sort of how does that fold into everything? And then the other question is, how are we going to get any of these people to exist anymore? Because all of those people that you are so proud and rightly so of bringing in were trained under what I think they still call the Cravath system of some form or another, right? Which is like this idea of creating these taking law students and turning them into world-class attorney.
Yeah, so on the first part, so for example, I hired Mike Schmidberger. He was the chairman of Sidley Austin for the past 7 years before he became chairman of Norm Law. So that's one example of someone who I've hired recently. We've hired a few other people like that and about to have a few more announcements of that nature in the next couple of weeks. So I have about 10 partners in place that all were at AM Law 20 firms. And then we'll grow a lot more from there. And I think that's really important because why are we doing that? It's because one, they have the expertise to actually provide really high-end legal advice. And then two, they know how to build a law firm. And it's a new law firm. It's a hybrid AI native type law firm, but it's still building a law firm. It's still the talent acquisition, the talent management, and how to just run a firm. So that's why we're doing it. And what we're uniquely doing is we're really at that intersection of expert trusted legal judgment and then being fully AI native. And I think it really takes both. I don't think you can be, as alluded to earlier, like a Y Combinator company that is just going to do, high level or low level agreement review and just focus on that, and then work your way up to competing with these people here. I think that would be a very long road. But I think the middle ground of saying being fully AI native, but having the people that are from these firms join, and then that is the way forward. So that's what we're doing.
So what does it mean, if I may, what does it mean to be AI native if you're bringing in big law partners, to actually perform the services? What's the AI native part of the law firm then?
Yeah, so it's what I was saying earlier on, the first pass of the work is done by AI agents. So effectively the associate level is becoming fully autonomous and fully artificial intelligence. And then on top of that, you still have some senior associates that help to build and tailor the AI agents. You have counsel level, you have equity partner. In our case, there is a little bit different in terms of equity partner. And then you have very senior people, for example, like Mike Schmidberger, that sit over the whole thing, and also in certain practice areas, you have a head of a practice area. So it's AI native in that the work, as much as possible, is being done by AI, but complemented by and fully supervised by the people who know how to do this work and supervise human associates and human counsel level today. And then it's also around the business model. So the business model is not charging by hours of human labor. And because a traditional law firm, the whole thing is optimized for 6-minute increments of human labor, both the talent model, the retention model, the business model, everything downstream from that. They're amazing machines, but the machines are optimized with that objective outcome. Whereas what we're optimizing for is outcomes, and it's for the work itself. It's not for how long it took to do the work. So when you have really smart people working really hard and they're optimizing an objective function, you better be sure it's the right objective function, because you have really smart people working really hard and they're going to build a Rube Goldberg machine of some sort, right? And so I want to build the right Rube Goldberg machine, one that is optimized around what is good for the client and is orthogonal to how long it took to do the work.
Okay, but I mean, I don't know if it was Kirkland taking someone from Wachtell or vice versa, but there was in the news, I think it was a $20 million pay package. So we're using the billable hour, we're making enough money that I can offer you all-star $20 million. How do you, in your new system, without the billable hour, right? I mean, early on you can use equity, it's wonderful, right? But at some point, how do you compete in sort of just compensation with firms that are,
Yeah, so basically one of the problems is over the past 10 years, there's been an auction for rainmakers. So because if you might leave from Kirkland and go somewhere else, just because of that, you're gonna have to bid up the price of that person. And so there's been this auction that has just driven up the overall cost of legal services to keep the rainmakers in place. And then that has downstream effects of having to jack up if someone just came out of Stanford Law School charging $1,500 an hour, because then that has to somehow go up to then pay at the very top, because they can charge $10,000 an hour at the very top. So then that has those downstream implications. And so we don't want to enter that auction. So we're not entering the rainmaker auction, but we are getting really good people. And there's a lot of people that are also blocked as non-equity partners. Because of the structure of these firms, the non-equity partner thing has become really big, and they are not able to see the same ability to grow their careers, but they're really good and they're really smart and they know how to do the work and deliver it well for the client. And so they are also very amenable to being part of this, of what we're doing.
So the economics of the very top minds in law could be violently disrupted, I would say, by something that Omar's company has been looking at, as well as others. I think Meta is now looking at creating a Zuckerberg clone. Tell us, Omar. tell us about the digital expert clone, if you want. Maybe clones, I don't mean that word in a direct.
Expert digital twin.
Yeah.
So look, we spent the first 2 years of our company very much heads down, working really closely with, we were fortunate to get about a dozen Fortune 200 companies where the chief legal officer was very closely engaged, and we were almost co-creating this vision together. And I think the biggest learning from that experience was that the real problem is not an AI problem. It's actually a knowledge problem. In other words, all the knowledge that's needed, whether it's an AI agent or a new human who joins a team, is currently distributed across a variety of SaaS applications and trapped in people's heads. And we went really deep into that second problem, I would say, from a product perspective of how do you actually represent the knowledge that's trapped in these experts' heads in the right way, and also like what is the landscape today? How does it actually work? If a lot of our customers will have hundreds of in-house lawyers, they use hundreds of external lawyers. So again, it's like one end of the market, I would say. But having spent a lot of time there, one of the most striking observations and surprises for us was everyone's familiar, I'm sure, with the Pareto principle of the 80-20 rule, essentially, which has been valid for the last 125 years. When we looked at the data and really all of our interactions with our customers, we found that it was actually more like the 95-5 rule, where there was this 5% of experts, both internally and externally, that were driving 95% of the outcomes. And so that then kind of made us think, okay, not all knowledge is equally valuable. Clearly, there's a core group of people, maybe across every workflow, litigation, M&A, compliance, et cetera. And so if there's 20 lawyers doing a certain type of work, we really wanted to know who are the 1 to 2 that are actually the ones that, again, put AI aside for a minute. If there's a new regulation or you get sued by somebody, who's like that person that you're turning to help guide you in the face of ambiguity. And the wonderful thing about the legal world is it's always changing. It's very dynamic. Even your own risk profile changes based on what your CEO said an hour ago. So really kind of we decided to narrow our focus heavily on that top 5% layer of experts. And what that culminated in was recently we announced the launch of these expert digital twins, which again, to date, it's been predominantly the internal in-house team who's created a digital twin. But the idea is all of the knowledge and context that's trapped in their head, we've created a mechanism through our product to actually extract and codify that knowledge. And the implication is that, number one, now the entire team, all 20, are starting to operate at the level of that best expert. Number two, the business can actually now have self-service, where for many of the questions where they are asking the legal team the same thing again and again, they can now agentically get the right answer, not just any answer, but actually the answer that is the best answer. And those human experts can actually design the system in a way where they can set the parameters where something does need to get elevated to a human. So that's really the thinking behind the expert digital twin. I think just like the last thing I'll say is, I think John and I are probably, of the AI native law firms that are out there, probably the only two that I'm aware of that have the tech company and the AI native law firm. And that does allow for a lot of really, really interesting feedback loops, flexibility, and how to give the customer the best thing, like he was saying. I think the difference between us that I'm gleaning is we're not like trying to hire the best AmLaw partners and build the next AI version of Kirkland & Ellis or compete with them. What we're finding is our customers already have a set of law firm partners they love working with who are in that expert tier. And so with their and the law firm's kind of consent, we're actually essentially creating expert digital twins of the external experts as well, with the caveat that they're going to have to get some kind of guarantee. They're getting a lot more work from the customer. They're actually getting a very, very different relationship where now they're actually building this brain the same way the in-house team is. And the knowledge is now not living in the expert's head. It's actually part of the system.
Do you sanitize when you digitally make a clone? Like, I mean, if the guy swears all the time, and that's part of his charm, right? Like Rahm Emanuel was a very effective minority whip, and when he, in an accident, lost his middle finger, he said, "I've been rendered mute," right? Like, I guess, let me try to broaden it a bit. Like, so there's a paper that just came out of Berkeley and Google DeepMind, the distortion of writing by LLMs, right? That it actually, the homogenization, even if you just tell it to edit, which I think was a little bit scary, right? Are you know, there's knowledge in terms of facts, and then there's what you might call personality and kind of quirks on this. It might seem like a small thing, but I wonder if part of what makes the top 5% times time effective is that they have their unique set of those characteristics. Is it going to turn everyone into sort of a bland version, and really you're just recreating the LLM, and just giving it a sort of quasi-rag to whatever the facts of that one expert are? Or do you try to retain even what you might call the flaws, right? Like Steve Jobs famously, right? Oh my God, he's crying all the time and then he's screaming, he's doing all this thing. So
yeah, well, so in building my own digital twin, which is kind of the precursor to doing this more for our customers, one of the observations that I've had from now, I think like probably like all of us working with AI for a while, is I believe we all have undocumented algorithm underlying almost all of our behavior and decision-making process. So whether it's planning a date night with your partner or doing legal work, there actually is some kind of algorithm that if you were forced to codify what is the process you're going through, you could actually do so. And so I think some of the like seemingly even stylistic, I think in some cases they are purely stylistic, but what we found is, again, in our world of the Fortune 1000, I'll just call it, a lot of time and effort goes into things like the 10K. There actually are a lot of nuances in getting the language exactly right in many cases. And so what may appear to be stylistic is actually often not stylistic. But if it is stylistic, we can actually also very, very quickly have the twin learn. And again, I think the reality is it's probably like being subjectively accurate is more important than being actually objectively accurate, because each company does have their own preference of how they like to use language, what kind of risk calibration based on the individual context they really would like to optimize for. And so it starts to learn that. And it's not like a one-to-one, there's Omar's twin and someone else's twin. A lot of times it'll be the top 3 people in any given workflow.
You merge them into one. Okay. Exactly. John, what do you think about the digital twin approach?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot embedded in people's minds that is useful to capture. And before I answer that, I actually want to return to the thing that I didn't get to answer before around how do people learn in this world, and it's related. So I think a lot of the way we learned historically has been super anachronistic. I think we've been not ambitious enough with how large language models more recently can be super helpful for learning. And I think, like, so for example, if you could spend years reviewing documents and be part of a few transactions, and what if in a week you could simulate 1,000 transactions, and you could be seeing all of that happen and reviewing it and getting surfaced about all of the nuances that occurred over a simulated of 10,000 years over like 10 days, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity to actually learn a lot faster and a lot more if we lean in and really try with AI. And I think you get up to speed in new areas of law like super quickly. And so I think I'm actually optimistic that people could still learn a lot of this. Of course, there's still the people skills. There's still a lot of the business skills that are required to be learned as well. But I think there's ways to teach that too. And then relating this back to the question you just asked around the digital twins, I think embedding partner level knowledge and really expert judgment into digital systems to then enable that to be part of these simulations, and to enable that to allow people to learn really quickly from those people in a more scalable way, where it's not that one partner could have talked to someone and that would have taken a few hours. Now they could embed part of their thinking in a few hour session into an AI system, and then that system could then be scaled across 1,000 people to learn about those things very quickly.
This point around how much information is available, I think, is a really critical one. And there's so much conversation about, so much of the workflow that's going to go away, and how, associates won't be needed, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's actually not quite the right perspective. I think it's an architecture question, right? If we architect the workflow in an optimal way, exactly to John's point, there is so much data, so much information that's available. And I read a perspective recently that really the limitation when it comes to using AI in the best way that you can is around the limitation on human cognition, right? There's only so much that we can process at once. And because of all of the parallel streams and parallel inputs of data that are available all at once through the advent of agents and infrastructures and architectures, there's just so much data that's available to us. And so how do we process all of that, right? And I think the question is, how do we enable ourselves to work with that data? What can we do? How can we set that up? And how can we learn to optimally think about it and analyze it, and then base our advice on that?
Scott, how is the cravat system evolving to account for the increased ability of AI to do the rote stuff?
So I agree with John's point about sort of how exciting AI is. I mean, it presents a challenge for training, right? If it automates sort of more of the junior level types of work, how do people become good lawyers if they don't have that? On the other hand, great opportunity because you can create new tools, people can learn much faster. So I'm super excited about that, and I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface on that point. In terms of like how the cravat system changes, it's really hard to say, and I realize that's a bad answer, but
you didn't get the question beforehand, so.
But I didn't get the question beforehand, so which can't blame me. But I can tell you it's something that people are really focused on. I think we recognize as a profession. I'm actually helping to organize sort of a forum where we're bringing together leaders from different law firms with Stanford to talk about this very problem, right? Like, what does the first year associate of the future need to look like when they come in the door? What kinds of skills should they have in order to be successful? It's an issue that I think that all law firms care about, law schools obviously care about, and so if we're going to have a healthy profession, we need to figure out how to address that. I think probably the same is true even if you're an AI native law firm, right? Like you can sort of hire the senior people today, but ultimately you need to sort of continue to develop good talent. So it's a real problem. I think the profession really does need to focus on it, and I think there's some exciting opportunities, but it's not a problem that's been solved yet.
Forgive me for saying with the digital twin, to me it's both such an exciting knowledge management concept that also forces you to kind of think a lot about like what is it in a human that kind of does it. But how often do you update? Is it continuous, right? Because my wife's a screenwriter. She says the way you know who the protagonist in the movie is the person who changes. That's the protagonist always. Cool, now I know. So if you feed the emails from the last decade, right, that doesn't mean that this person wouldn't have taken in the next 2 years, changed how they think about something fundamentally and be a different mind, right? And part of what you want is somebody who can evolve. So how often are you updating it, or is it just like every time I send an email, right? I mean,
Yeah. So it's constantly being updated, and that's both in light of explicit feedback and implicit feedback. So as the person uses it, and again, this is where I really struggle to see how, I mean, I can understand maybe for, again, a temporary period of time, a lot of AI native law firms who are just taking, I don't know, NDAs or some very, very low complexity, high volume area where no one should be paying a lot of money for that. I can see how there's a business there. But it really does feel like for anyone who's actually using the LLMs directly, you can honestly do a lot there as well. And it may not be worth necessarily paying an external service provider, especially who's not caught up or obviously on your business. So where I really see the most interesting opportunity and where it kind of answers your question is whether it's internal or external, the best humans, knowledge workers, forget even lawyers, are the ones who actually start to really deeply understand how this organization functions and what is the risk profile, how does that change, what are the historic ways. Like I was talking to a chief legal officer the other day, and his philosophy on contracting is when times are good, nothing matters. When times are bad, everything matters. And so they used to be a small company, and they're now like a $10 billion revenue company. And as the legal team has grown, he's really struggled to train the team, which was once could fit in a small room and he could easily train them. And now there's too many people, so they have playbooks. Unfortunately, they're out of date that they're created. And they have all this like layers of middle management and playbook oriented, rules based sort of methodologies to try to keep the team up to date and trained on that principle. So in this case, the digital twin takes care of that problem because now anyone who's even starting to review a contract has already had the digital twin take a look at it, even explain the thinking behind it. And it just creates a much better mechanism. But again, maybe the company evolves and next month something happens that actually changes the risk profile. There's people who have certain admin rights who are able to actually override the system's preferences explicitly, and then it can also start to suggest things based on what it's seeing.
Yeah, I mean, judges can choose now to say, I want to publish this opinion, put it in the fancy books, make it part of the official Westlaw Reporter series, or unpublished. Like, nah, I'm just dashing that one off. Don't worry about that one, right? And you can imagine the experts being able to say, oh, that email is great. I want that to represent me. All right, I want to leave some time for question. I'm going to incentivize, especially the founders. You can give a little one-sentence thing of what your company does, one sentence. So help me God if you do two. Great way to get it out there and introduce yourself. But let's please use the mics and form an early queue. Oh, you're already up there. All right. Howard needs to know, and he does not need to tell us what he doesn't know.
Came up here just to take my spot here. So,
all right, well done.
Howard Chow. So I'd like to suggest a somewhat different definition of what an AI native law firm is by focusing on the starting point of a law firm, right, in terms of governance, right? So is it possible that if we posit that there's, at least today, a certain optimal structure for a law firm where it uses AI in a certain way, the lawyers do certain things, AI does other things, there's certain tools that we use, that certain law firms, because of the starting point, their governance starting point, who controls the law firm, who owns the law firm, they can't get from here to there, right? So because senior partners control, senior partners own the equity, senior partners are resistant, compensation structures will have to change, they don't like the change, the structure of the staffing will have to change, and so maybe what you can talk about a little bit is, and I think this is more of a problem first with the lower end, the middle, the end. I don't think this is going to hit, say, the Cravats of the world or the Herbert Smiths of the world, because you're at the top end. I mean, if you talk about innovator's dilemma, it always starts from the bottom, right? But it just feels like the difference between an AI native law firm and a traditional law firm could be in the governance, and could be the barriers to change because of the governance and the ownership. Maybe you can speak to that.
All right. I mean, in principle, that makes sense, right? I guess I am not seeing what the barriers are to us adopting AI, extraordinarily quickly and using it just as effectively as a new law firm starting up could use it. To my earlier point, I don't think it's sort of like a capital point, because it's not capital heavy investment that's required here. I hear the point that historically it's been, billable hour has been the basis of pricing, but I don't think that's inherent to the way that law firms operate. There's lots of law firms, it's already been happening. People have, alternative fee arrangements that are increasingly popular. Maybe those will become more popular and more widely used because of AI, but there's nothing that I see that's a structural impediment to traditional law firms adopting those.
Howard, I think you're right. You're right. That governance is something that really needs to be considered, and the structure of more traditional firms is more resistant to change, right? Because of all the layers of consideration that go into it, and the layers of approval and everything that needs to go into it. But I do think it's possible. And it's just a question of whether the intention is there. I think if we analogize to other industries, we've seen how consultancies and financial services have transformed their operations to be much more tech native over the last decade, right? And really become tech companies, and now they're data companies. And I think it's possible, but it is, again, it's that unlearning, right? So it's unlearning and leveling the playing field and then rebuilding. But I think the advantage that traditional firms have is that they know how to do it, right? So it's funny, we're coming at it from different angles. John is working to build the expertise that traditional law firms have, right? You're looking at digital twins that are mimicking that expertise. We are trying to understand AI nativity and that data enrichment and intelligence layer. So I think we are all moving in the right directions. It's just a matter of speed, and speed is currency.
And do you think we converge? Does it all, if you guys use AI as best you can, yeah, and John and Omar use expertise as best they can, do you end up in the same place?
I think we become panel competitors. Yeah, we do.
But and I think the thing that it misses, right, is that the pie very well, and I think the pie will be growing, right? Like if our predictions about how efficient AI will be are true, the economy could double in size in 5 years. So you're talking about companies that have, much more revenue, more legal problems. There are more companies, right? And so, and that puts aside the point that, 90% of people who need legal services can't afford them, right? So there's, a lot of legal demand to go around, and I think it very well could be a growing pie. This isn't an either or.
Because the AmLite definitely needs more pie. Please, let's go.
Hi everyone, my name is Paul. I'm co-founder of Bayshore, and because I'm also in the business of selling legal AI agents, I'm very interested in how you convince customers that AI can actually do the job, and also that, naive approaches like just, using ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot and so on won't cut it, but they need your solutions to add, the required reliability.
Yeah, I mean, I can start there. I think evals and just showing objectively what the performance is. I think right now the right question everyone should be asking is, why would I pay anything for legal AI when I can get extremely good AI off the shelf, to your point? I mean, extremely good and extremely bad, right? It kind of depends on your perspective, but certainly either affordable or someone's already paid for it in your organization and it's a minimal incremental cost, right? So for us, we just hold ourselves to a very objective, high standard around measuring, in particular, I would say, accuracy and consistency. And with consistency, we're like 4.2x any of the leading foundation models. But that is like data that I think you have to both have and then also make it very easy for the customer to see for themselves.
Yeah, and I would say they should just use, OpenAI or Anthropic unless they want guarantees on it being legal advice or guarantees on it hitting a certain level of accuracy for a regulatory purpose.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. My name is John Nader. I'm founder of Arbitration, does AI dispute resolution. My questions are for Omar and John and Scott. I'm curious, what promises do you either make, or what promises have you been asked?
No, we're not letting you ask everyone but Ilona. That's a moderator. It's not allowed. So
No, I'm sorry. You're right. Well, I was going for for anyone interested.
For the panel.
To what extent do you make promises about the extent of human involvement in the answers you deliver to your clients? I guess, Omar, for you, that's the internal client on being served by the internal attorney. To what extent do you make promises about the extent of human involvement on any particular answer? And have you seen pushback from your clients about that? Can I get a reliable, fixed post in the sand about how much I'm going to actually talk to a human or get input from a human?
Yeah, I mean, John might have even more to say on the law firm side. So, to be clear, we have Udia Counsel, and then we have Udia, the core technology company, and our first 18 months pure technology company, we launched Udia Counsel, which has been a great accelerant to learn a lot about how I think all law firms should kind of move towards operating in the future. And we're now partnering increasingly with many of those law firms, with our customers. I think on the macro question, or maybe the question behind the question, is from a liability perspective. I think that's one of the most interesting questions, because the reality is, for a lot of the bet the company work, especially, the real incentives are, even for the chief legal officer, to have some level of board cover, where if you're hiring any of the top firms, you're not going to get fired if something goes wrong. And that's very different than the run the company matters, which are call it the day-to-day. Someone on my contracting team just left and I have a lot of overflow work or what have you. So I think there's different categories. We're certainly not unilaterally having our law firm take on bet the company matters right now. We are working as co-counsel in many cases, but there's so many humans involved, that question hasn't really come up because it's just so obvious. And on the more run the company matters, I would say we do provide assurances and take on the liability. And that's, I think, where, frankly, that's where, like, if we're being honest with ourselves, this entire industry, I mean, everyone's questioning what it even means to practice law. If you can now, every business person in the world is certainly using foundation models, whether you like it or not, to do a lot of legal work. And I think the assurances that you can provide by having some level of taking on the liability will actually translate to economic value in a world where the work itself is obviously becoming increasingly possible by agents.
La?
Yeah. I'll pass it along.
Yeah, I mean, if legal advice is being provided, there's a human fully supervising the legal work.
All right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna. I'm a co-founder of Apart AI. It's AI for family law. And I have a question. I want to circle back about billing hours. And I want to ask Omar and John, and then Ilona and Scott, how you feel about what's your value proposition for law firms when you're offering them AI tools, and how they're answering you back about reducing billable hours, or is like a threat for billable hours. And similar question to Ilona and Scott, like, what do you think? Is there any conversations inside the firms? Do you need to change the financial model, how you're offering to your clients? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'll kick us off. I think the billable hour has been around for so long. I'll just say I think it's a measure of time, but it'll increasingly be less of a measure of value. And understanding what captures value is really important. And I think that's a question for all of us, right? We, as a law firm, we certainly have to take the cue from our clients and understand what are they looking for and how do we deliver that to them that's in a way that's best in class. But I think something that I think about is how do we deliver in a new way, right? What can we offer our clients that they may not be expecting? I don't think it's on the clients to come to us and tell us what they want, right? They're busy doing their day jobs, but I certainly see it as my job and working with colleagues across the firm to figure out how can we deliver something to you that is differentiated, where you will find value. And then, understand that the time that we spend on matters with AI capabilities will have to be transparent, and certain things will be more productive and efficient.
All right, and I'm told there's nothing worse than when your CodeX panel ends and you realize you have to wait a year for the next one or two, whatever it is. Especially
Pablo,
with
you've been so great.
Oh, especially with such an amazing panel. But no, hold on. But we're gonna do one more question and then we're gonna call it in. I'm just preparing everyone emotionally for the fact that after this question we are gonna really have to wrap it up and thank our fantastic panelists.
Thank you, Pablo. I don't want to be the last question. Carlos Gomez here. Just want to do a little deeper dive on Howard's question on your thoughts on the value of specialization for these native law firms, and especially, we've seen before the setup of managed services arms and by law firms, and so seems to be a service delivery transformation type of initiative. So, are you seeing that traditional law firms are going to be more successful by incubator or spinning out native AI law firms, or are you aiming to transform the entire delivery model within the existing law firms?
So that's what Scott and Ilona, right? Yeah, why don't you guys spin out an AI native law firm?
Yeah. Never say never,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, Scott.
Not bad.
I think this goes to the same point around rethinking delivery models, and I think increasing. I mean, we're seeing this in our analogous industries and professional services. We're seeing this in banking and consulting, where there are subsidiaries created that are delivering technology in addition to professional services advice, and I think that's instructive. And some firms may go in that direction. Some are already starting to, and others will be more kind of traditional and focus on existing service lines.
Scott, is there a cravat swing and more AI coming in the future, and AI or something?
Not that I'm aware.
All right, well, let's put our hands together and thank our fantastic panelists. It's an absolute privilege to be here. And